My name is Robert, I'm 63 years old, and 3 months ago I watched a grown man throw my 8-year-old grandson into a wall over a spilled glass of juice. I didn't yell. I didn't lay a hand on him. I just watched, and I remembered every second of it, because I already knew, standing in that kitchen, that calm was going to be the only weapon I'd need. Before you go anywhere, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching this from tonight. I read every single one. Now let's get into it. My daughter, Sarah, married a man named Chris about 6 years ago. Good guy, mostly. Worked construction, showed up for his family, loved my daughter the way I always hoped somebody would. His father, though, a man named Gary, was a different story entirely. I never liked him, not from the first dinner we ever had together. There was something about the way he talked to Chris, even as a grown man, like Chris still owed him something. Sharp comments. A tone that made rooms go quiet. Sarah used to say, "That's just how Gary is, Dad." His old school. I've heard that excuse my whole life for men who scare people into silence. My grandson, Tyler, was 8 years old, sweet as anything, obsessed with dinosaurs and terrible at hiding when he was nervous. And around Gary, Tyler was always a little nervous. I noticed it at family gatherings, the way Tyler's shoulders would come up around his ears whenever Grandpa Gary walked into a room. I asked Sarah about it once. She brushed it off. "He's just intense, Dad. Tyler will grow out of being shy around him." I should have pushed harder. I think about that a lot now. It was a Sunday afternoon in April. Sarah had asked me to pick Tyler up from Chris's parents' house in Fairview, about 40 minutes outside the city, one of those quiet suburban streets with big front lawns and basketball hoops over every garage. Sarah and Chris were at a wedding out of town, and Gary and his wife, Linda, were watching Tyler for the weekend. I got there around 4 in the afternoon, pulled into the driveway, and before I even got my seatbelt off, I heard it. Yelling. A man's voice, sharp and furious, coming from inside the house. And then a sound I will hear for the rest of my life, a heavy thud, like something solid hitting a wall, followed immediately by a child screaming. I don't remember running up that driveway. I remember being inside the house. Tyler was on the floor of the kitchen, curled up against the baseboard, sobbing, holding his arm against his chest at an angle that made my stomach drop the second I saw it. There was a glass shattered on the tile a few feet away, orange juice spreading out in a puddle. And Gary was standing over him, red in the face, still shouting, something about clumsy and how many times and learn to be careful, like the child on the floor wasn't the one who'd just been hurt, like Gary was the injured party in all of this. I didn't say a word to Gary. Not one. I walked past him like he wasn't there, knelt down next to Tyler, and I said, "I've got you, buddy. Grandpa's got you. We're gonna go get that checked out, okay?" Linda was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, pale, not saying anything, not moving. I remember thinking, even in that moment, that her silence told me everything about how many times this had happened before when I wasn't in the room. I carried Tyler out to my car myself, buckled him in as gently as I could while he cried, and I called Sarah with my hands shaking so bad I dropped the phone twice. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said when she picked up. "Tyler's hurt. I'm taking him to the ER right now. I need you to come home." At the emergency room in Fairview, the doctor who examined Tyler was a young woman named Dr. Patel, careful and thorough in a way I was grateful for later, though I didn't fully understand why yet. She confirmed what I already feared, a fractured forearm, the kind of injury, she said gently, that doesn't usually come from a fall. She asked Tyler what happened, in a soft voice, with me right there holding his good hand. And my grandson, 8 years old, looked up at both of us and said, "Grandpa Gary threw me." I spilled my juice and he grabbed my arm and threw me into the wall. Dr. Patel didn't react the way I expected. She didn't look shocked. She nodded slowly, wrote something down, and said, "Mister, I'm sorry, what's your relation to Tyler?" "Grandfather. Maternal side," I said. "I need to document this thoroughly," she said, "and I want you to know that we're required by law to report suspected abuse. I'll also need to ask you some questions separately, if that's all right." I said of course. And that's when something in me went very quiet and very still, not calm because I wasn't angry. I was angrier than I have ever been in my life. Calm because I understood, sitting in that hospital room, that anger wasn't going to protect my grandson. Documentation was. Patience was. Doing this the right way, the way that would actually hold up, the way that would make sure Gary never got another chance to be alone with that boy again, that was going to protect him. While Dr. Patel examined Tyler further, I stepped into the hallway and I did something I don't think anyone expected of me, not even myself in that moment. I opened the notes app on my phone, and I started writing down everything. The exact time I arrived at the house. The exact words I heard through the door. The position Tyler was in on the floor. What Linda's face looked like, and the fact that she said nothing. Every detail, while it was still burned fresh into my mind, before grief or rage could start rounding off the edges of my memory the way they always do. I had no idea yet how far that decision was about to take me, or what I was going to find out about Gary once I actually started looking. Sarah and Chris got to the hospital that night, both of them white with panic, both of them apologizing to me over and over like it was somehow their fault for not being there. I told them it wasn't. I told them the only person who owed anyone an apology was still sitting in that house in Fairview, probably telling himself by now that he hadn't done anything wrong. Chris was the one who surprised me. I expected him to make excuses for his father, the same way Sarah always had. Instead, he sat down next to Tyler's hospital bed, looked at his son's arm in that cast, and said, quiet and flat, "I'm done protecting him." I didn't know yet how much weight was behind those words. I'd find out. The hospital filed their report with Child Protective Services that same night, exactly as Dr. Patel said they would. A caseworker named Denise called me 2 days later, and I told her everything. The timeline, what I'd heard through the door, what Tyler had said, what Linda's silence had told me. She asked if I had any documentation. I told her I did, and I sent her everything from my notes app, time-stamped, detailed. But something Denise said on that call stuck with me. She asked, carefully, professionally, "Has this happened before, to your knowledge? With this household?" I said I didn't know, but I decided I was going to find out. I called my old friend Marcus, a retired detective I'd known for almost 30 years, and I asked him, off the record, how a person might go about learning whether Gary Whitfield had any history, police reports, restraining orders, anything at all, from decades back. Marcus made some calls. 3 days later, he called me back, and what he told me changed the entire shape of this story. Gary had 2 other children besides Chris, an older son named Mark, who hadn't spoken to Gary in over 15 years, and a daughter named Diane, who lived across the country in Oregon and, according to public court records Marcus dug up, had once filed a restraining order against her own father back when she was 19 years old. The order had expired decades ago and been buried in old county records nobody thought to look at. But it was real. It existed. And it told me that what happened to Tyler in that kitchen wasn't some isolated moment of a man losing his temper for the first time in his life. It was a pattern that had been running quietly through this family for over 30 years, one that everybody had simply learned to work around, to excuse, to call old school instead of what it actually was. I got Diane's number through Marcus and I called her myself. I'll never forget how she sounded on that phone, not shocked, not even really surprised. Just tired, in the way you sound when something you buried a long time ago finally gets dug back up. She told me things about her childhood I won't repeat here, but I will tell you this. By the end of that phone call, she agreed to write a statement. She agreed to testify if it ever came to that. She said, "Somebody should have stopped him 30 years ago. I'm not going to be the reason nobody stops him now." With Denise's investigation, the hospital's documentation, my own notes, and now Diane's statement adding decades of context behind it, this stopped being one bad afternoon in a kitchen. This became a criminal case. Gary was charged with felony child abuse. And because of the pattern Diane's statement helped establish, the DA's office pushed hard. This wasn't going to be treated like a first-time lapse in judgment from an otherwise decent man. I sat in that courtroom 4 months later, next to Sarah, next to Chris, watching Gary in a gray suit that didn't look like it fit him the way it used to. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked small. The judge sentenced him to 18 months, with a permanent no-contact order protecting Tyler until he turns 18. Linda didn't come to a single day of the trial. I heard through Sarah, months later, that she'd finally left him too, filed for divorce about 6 weeks after the sentencing, moved in with her sister 2 states away. I don't know everything that finally made her walk out a door she'd apparently been standing in front of for 30 years. But I hope, wherever she is now, that she's found some peace. Chris hasn't spoken to his father since the arrest. Not one phone call, not one letter. He told me once, sitting on my back porch a few months after everything settled, I spent my whole life making myself smaller so he wouldn't get angry. I wasn't going to let my son learn that same lesson. I think that's the bravest thing I've ever heard that man say. Tyler's arm healed just fine, the way kids' bones usually do. He still loves his dinosaurs. He still spends weekends at my house now instead of Fairview, and last month, for the first time since it happened, I watched him laugh, really laugh, shoulders down, not up around his ears, while we built a plastic T-Rex skeleton together on my kitchen table. I think about that day in the hospital hallway a lot. How close I came to just being angry, to saying something to Gary I could never take back, to making this about my own rage instead of my grandson's safety. I'm glad I didn't, because the version of justice that actually protected Tyler, the one that finally stopped a 30-year pattern nobody else had been brave enough to name, that version needed patience a lot more than it needed my fists. If this story hit you the way it hit me writing it down, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to Dadlaw Story if you haven't already, and drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one of them, and I'll see you in the next story.